Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're studying the words of the Buddha. We're moving into a new volume today, which is Volume 7. It's titled Breathing Mindfulness Meditation. We're going to be studying chapters 1 through 10. And the way that we do this program is I invite students who are in Zoom to be able to volunteer to read a chapter. Then I'm going to share some teachings on that chapter. Then I'm going to open up to any and all questions that you guys have, whether you're in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. You can ask questions by putting that into the comment section. Or if you're in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any and all questions that you like. It's through studying the original words of the Buddha that's going to help you to be able to inform your practice and understand what it is that it takes to be able to make your way to this enlightened mental state. So welcome to all of you, whether you're joining for the first time or you're joining regularly. If you'd like to get access to these books, you can go to buddhadailywisdom.com and you can click on free books and you'll see them there so that you could maybe read them before class and or after class to be able to be fully informed so you can get the most benefit out of the class. But if you haven't actually read these books yet, it's okay, because we're going to be reading at least the words of the Buddha during the class, and that's going to be able to help you to be able to understand what he actually taught in his own words, and then you can actually practice what he taught so you can actually experience the real results of moving the mind closer and closer to enlightenment. So is there anyone who would like to volunteer to read this first chapter? Okay, it looks like Marcy and Samantha. So we'll just take you guys one at a time. Go ahead, Marcy.
Thank you, Teacher David. Monks, mindfulness of breathing, breathing mindfulness meditation, when developed and cultivated, is of great fruit and benefit. And how, monks, is mindful of breathing, breathing mindfulness meditation, developed and cultivated so that it is of great fruit and benefit? Here, monks, a monk, having gone to the forest, to the foot of a tree, or an empty hut, sits down, having folded his legs crosswise, straightened his body, and set up mindfulness in front of him. Just mindful he breathes in, mindful he breathes out. Breathing in long, he knows I breathe in long. Or breathing out long, he knows I breathe out long. Breathing in short, he knows I breathe in short. Or breathing out short, he knows I breathe out short. He trains thus, experiencing the whole body, I will breathe in. He trains thus, experiencing the whole body, I will breathe out. He trains thus, He trains thus, calming the bodily sensations, I will breathe in. He trains us, calming the bodily sensations, I will breathe out. He trains us, experiencing joy, I will breathe in. He trains thus, experiencing joy, I breathe out. He trains thus, experiencing peacefulness, I will breathe in. He trains thus, experiencing peacefulness, I will breathe out. He trains us, experiencing the mental activity, I will breathe in. He trains thus, experiencing the mental activity, I will breathe out. He trains us, calming the mental activity, I will breathe in. He trains us, calming the mental activity, I will breathe out. He trains thus, experiencing the mind, I will breathe in. He trains thus, experiencing the mind, I will breathe out. He trains thus, gladdening the mind, I will breathe in. He trains thus, gladdening the mind, I will breathe out. He trains thus, concentrating the mind, I will breathe in. He trains thus, concentrating the mind, I will breathe out. He trains thus, liberating the mind, I will breathe in. He trains thus, liberating the mind, I will breathe out. He trains thus, reflecting on impermanence, I will breathe in. He trains thus, reflecting on impermanence, I will breathe out. He trains thus, reflecting on fading away, I will breathe in. He trains thus, reflecting on fading away, I will breathe out. He trains thus, reflecting on elimination, I will breathe in. He trains thus, reflecting on elimination, I will breathe out. He trains thus, reflecting on letting go, I will breathe in. He trains thus, reflecting on letting go, I will breathe out. It is, monks, When mindfulness of breathing mindfulness meditation, is developed and cultivated in this way, that is of great fruit and benefit. When, monks, mindfulness of breathing mindfulness meditation has been developed and cultivated in this way, one of two fruits may be predicted: either final knowledge, wisdom in this very life, or if there is a residual of clinging, the state of a non-returner.
Okay, thank you, Marcy. So this is the Buddha setting up to help his students to understand how to do breathing mindfulness meditation and what it actually leads to as benefits. He talks about two benefits here, but these aren't the only two benefits. You're going to see how the Buddha teaches that he oftentimes will have one discourse where he's explaining certain benefits, and then he'll have another discourse that is explaining some more benefits, and another one and another one. So whenever you're learning the teachings of the Buddha, it's important to look at them in their totality and not just look at one isolated discourse and think that these are the only two benefits with breathing mindfulness meditation, because that's not actually true. This is just two particular benefits that he's talking about in this particular discourse. So as we go through here, he's actually talking about setting up for meditation and how to actually meditate. And ultimately, he's going to explain how to do meditation and then the benefits of having done it. So here at the very beginning, he's talking about where you would actually go in order to meditate. So during his lifetime, he would encourage people to go to the forest or a foot of a tree or an empty hut, where today we might go to a temple, we might go to your bedroom, your living room, a park, or any number of different places. That there's not just, these three places that you would be able to go and meditate. You can actually meditate anywhere that you would like to meditate. I've seen people meditate on a rocking boat before. They're sitting on an engine compartment and the boat's rocking side to side, and we're out in the middle of the big river and people are meditating. So you can really meditate anywhere at any time if you've developed your practice to be able to meditate with the body, the mind, and the breath. And those are the only three things that you actually need. So you are going to need to find different places. You're going to actually need to move your practice around. Whereas if you tend to be meditating in exactly the same place all the time, your mind will have a tendency to grab onto that. It can get attached to it. And now you have an attachment that's formed that your mind is only comfortable meditating in one particular place. So you'd like to make a concerted effort to move your meditation practice around so that you don't even have any attachment or clinging in your actual meditation practice. Here, the Buddha is talking about sitting down to do meditation. There's 4 positions that he taught: seated, lying, standing, and walking. But when you're first starting to teach students, it's typically the seated position that they're learning first. So here he's referring to the seated position. Then he talks about folding the legs. This is something that someone might do, but there's other ways to sit too. This isn't the only way to actually sit, because if everybody was sitting in exactly the same way, that would be permanence, and we know that that's not true. But he's just giving guidance and suggestions of how to actually meditate here. Then he talks about straightening up the body. What he's meaning here, and the reason why he's teaching this, is that by having the upper body erect with the sternum up and the shoulders back, it'll keep the mind attentive and alert during the meditation, because this is a dedicated, active, purposeful training session where you'd like to be eliminating certain unwholesome qualities and cultivating certain wholesome qualities. So you need the mind to be attentive and alert during the meditation. Whereas if you were slouched, you might be dull or lethargic, or if your upper body was real rigid, your mind could be overactive or uptight. So by straightening the upper body, you can have the upper body in the middle where you can keep some attentiveness and alertness to the mind. Then he talks about setting up mindfulness in front of him. This is something that he guides you to do prior to each meditation, because mindfulness is awareness of mind. The opposite of setting up mindfulness in front of you prior to meditating would be to just plop down into meditation and start actually meditating. And in this situation, it's probably going to be 5, 10, 15 minutes before you actually start reaping the benefits of that meditation. But if you can bring some general awareness to the mind as you're easing down into meditation, this will actually really help you to get more benefit out of the meditation itself. This is why I teach chanting, and that's why I do chanting, because this is a great way to be able to develop mindfulness as you're easing down into the meditation. You get this awareness of mind, awareness of the breath, and ease the mind in the meditation so that you can get more benefit out of the meditation itself. So now, once the mind is mindful and you've set up that mindfulness in front of you, you just breathe in and you breathe out. This is starting to establish the breath in the meditation. And then the Buddha goes on here to say, if the breath is long or if it's short, know that it's long or short. What he's talking about here is it doesn't matter the amount of volume that you have in your lungs in terms of the depth of your breath. What matters is that you focus the mind on the breath itself. It doesn't matter whether it's long or short, just focus the mind on the breath. That's what he's starting you off with at the very beginning of the meditation so that you would understand that. Then as you're meditating, you're going to start experiencing various sensations in the body. And as you start experiencing these various sensations in the body, you would like to calm the bodily sensations where the mind isn't deterred or distracted because of a little itch here or a little scratch there. You would like to just calm those down from within the mind. And as you're doing this is training the mind to let go and let go and let go. And because of that, you're going to start noticing that the mind starts to experience this joy and this peacefulness starts to spring up in the mind as you're meditating. Maybe not the first time or the second time, but as you develop your practice more and more, this is what you'll experience. And then you're going to start to experience mental activity. This is the various thoughts and ideas that start going through the mind. And you're going to start being aware of those thoughts and ideas and the various things that are traveling through the mind. And you need to be able to calm that mental activity by bringing your mind back to the breath. That's why he says at the end of each one of these statements that he trains thus, calming the mental activity, I will breathe in. What he means is just keep bringing the mind back to the breath and focus on the breath, because that's what's going to calm the mental activity. And then you'll start experiencing the condition of the mind, that you're going to start not only seeing the feelings and the thoughts and the ideas and you're calming that down, but you're going to start experiencing the mind, meaning you're going to start experiencing the condition of the mind. And then that's where you would like to uplift the mind and start gladdening the mind. Sometimes when you're in meditation, you might feel dull or lethargic. You'd like to uplift the mind with this gladness in the mind, applying right effort to do that. Then that's where you'll start seeing the concentration or the focus coming into the mind. The mind's going to start becoming more free or liberated because you're training your mind to let go, let go, let go. And then as anything is coming up during your meditation, you would like to always remember that these things are impermanent, not focusing on them and holding on to them and clinging to them, wanting them to be permanent. Instead, just let go. Even if something wholesome comes up, even if like the best idea you've ever had in your entire life comes up during meditation, cut that off and let it go. Clear it out of the mind, because you'll be able to then think about that later. This isn't the time to think about it. It's time to actually cut off and let go. So remember that all these things are impermanent. And then remember that these things are going to fade away because they're impermanent. You need to experience this elimination of this constant activity in the mind. And now you can start training your mind to let go, because you've matured the mind and matured the mind and matured the mind. So what we've got here is we've got a detailed description from the Buddha of what he would instruct somebody to be able to do during meditation. But you don't need to actually remember all of these things. The guidance that I give during the meditation that you guys have participated with me many times, that's a consolidated version of this. What this essentially is that when we were all children, we were taught to brush our teeth by our parents. It was like, all right, little David, here's the toothbrush, run it under the water, put some toothpaste on it, run it under the water again, put it in your mouth, rub it around on all sides of your teeth and your tongue and the roof of your mouth, straight back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Okay, now spit out the toothpaste, rinse your mouth. Right? There's all these instructions and all these steps. But now, because we know those and we've done that so many times, we don't even think about all those steps. We just actually do it. We get the work done. So this is the Buddha describing to you how to do the work. But you shouldn't think that you need to repeat these statements in the mind while you're meditating, because anytime your mind is thinking about something during meditation, your mind is holding on. So this is why, like this particular statements here, sometimes people get confused and they think they need to recite these during their actual meditation, or they might be doing counting where they're counting during their meditation. Or here in Thailand, it's very common to do poot, toe, Or you might hear people that are doing things like body scanning, where they're looking at the body. This is the mind holding on to things rather than being trained to actually let go. So while the Buddha is sharing this is something that you learn, and you understand that this is what needs to be done during the meditation, but then you just get it done, where you focus on the breath, and anytime the mind moves off the breath, you cut that off and let it go and bring the mind back to the breath. Anytime you see bodily sensations coming up, you calm those. You would like to experience this joy and this peacefulness as it's coming into the mind. Understand it's going to lift up the mind. As you're experiencing this mental activity, calm that down. As you're starting to experience the condition of the mind, you would like to gladden the mind and uplift it. You're going to start to experience concentration, and you'd like to focus the mind on the breath. You're going to start noticing that the mind starts to become more free, and you'll need to be able to understand that all these experiences that you're having during meditation are impermanent. So these things are all going to fade away and be eliminated. So you need to let them go and just keep coming back to the breath. That's why the Buddha keeps repeating each one of these statements. He says, I will breathe in. He trains thus, reflecting on impermanence. I will breathe out, meaning keep focusing on the breath, even though you're doing these things internally within the mind, not saying the statements, but the mind is mentally doing these things. You keep focusing the mind back on the breath. And then the Buddha says, okay, having developed this meditation and cultivated it in this way, the benefits are that you're either going to get to enlightenment in this very life, because that's what final knowledge is. When you fully understand the path to enlightenment, you fully cultivated wisdom, now the mind is actually enlightened. So this meditation, he's saying it leads to enlightenment, or it leads to the third stage of enlightenment, where an individual would be reborn into the heavenly realm and attain enlightenment from there. They would have eliminated the first 5 fetters and then rebirth in the heavenly realm. So these aren't the only 2 benefits, but these are 2 that he's talking about here. Let me know what questions you guys have here about this particular discourse. You can put those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like Marcy has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Teacher David. Could you explain gladdening of the mind? Like, what exactly is that? Like, how would one experience the gladdening of the mind during meditation?
Yeah, this is like uplifting the mind. So if you're in meditation and you notice that your mind goes to like dark thoughts, or it's disgruntled or agitated or feeling dull or lethargic, you'd like to lift it up out of that state and uplift the mind and experience that gladdening of the mind. And this will start to permeate in the mind, and your mind will start being wired like this more and more.
So I have noticed that there are particular times during my breathing mindfulness meditation where the mind almost feels like, how would I explain? Illuminated, I guess is a good word. And in those moments of illumination, I feel the face of this body will smile, and it's not like a force. It's not anything. It's just like this intense. Not even intense, because that's an incorrect word to use. But this illumination of the mind and a smile just kind of is like a response to it. Is that something that I should be letting go as well? Should I be letting that go, or just stay with that feeling of illumination and keep just focusing on the breath?
That sounds like it's unconditioned gladness or unconditioned joy, and that's what you would like to permeate in the mind. So if it's unconditioned joy, unconditioned happiness, you won't be able to cut it off. It's not possible, because there's no condition that's causing it. So even if you tried to cut it off, you wouldn't be able to. So you could try to cut it off, but if it just continues to permeate in the mind, then you'll know that it's unconditioned joy, and you're not going to be able to cut it off. And that's what you would like to do, is gladden the mind, allow that to permeate in the mind. So that's essentially rewiring the mind to experience this gladness all throughout your day.
That makes sense now, because I wasn't able to cut it off, and I'm like, what am I doing here? But all right, thank you, Teacher David. I appreciate it.
Yeah, one of the other ways you'll know that it's unconditioned joy is not only because you won't be able to cut it off, but there won't be any bodily sensations associated with it. Because if it's a conditioned feeling, there's going to be bodily sensations. Typically with the pleasant ones, it's going to be tingling across the shoulders or up the spine, up the back of the head and over the head. So if you're not experiencing that tingling and that bodily sensation associated with pleasant feelings, then you know this is unconditioned joy.
Yeah, it was just the smile that kind of arose on the face. There wasn't any kind of like force or anything to it. So I wasn't, I wasn't clear in the mind. Was that considered a bodily sensation? But I wasn't having any of that tingliness. It was just like this illumination, and a smile arose, and then I was trying to cut it off, and it wasn't going anywhere. It just kind of stayed with me. So at that point, I just kept focusing on the breath and just let it be.
Perfect. Yep, that's what you would like to do. Just keep focusing on the breath, because if it's unconditioned joy, unconditioned gladness, it'll just continue to sit there and permeate. There's no condition that's causing it. It's actually occurring because you're getting rid of the pollution. So it's being experienced in the mind. Okay, we have a question from Mayu Lee on Facebook. She says, "Teacher, can I think of this as applying the 7 factors of enlightenment to bring the mind to the middle and focus on the breath?" There is an aspect of breathing mindfulness meditation where you are cultivating the 7 factors of enlightenment. You're going to see a discourse in a moment, if you haven't already read, where what we just read and what we just are now studying, that leads to the development of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And when you develop the 4 foundations of mindfulness, that leads to the development of the 7 factors of enlightenment, where you're now practicing that. So the answer to your question is yes, but you need to go through the development of the 4 foundations of mindfulness to be able to then cultivate the 7 factors of enlightenment. So we're going to talk about this in more depth here in a moment, Mayu Lee. Okay, it looks like Alberto has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, David. I think I struggle with my, in between being an observer of the breathing or focusing on the breathing. Sometimes I don't know whether I'm controlling it or not. I mean, I don't try to count, but sometimes I feel that when I observe the breathing, I tend to be too relaxed, and then my mind goes away, and then I don't know, when I try to go back into focusing on the breathing, whether I'm controlling it too much. I couldn't find that somewhere in between where I feel peacefully just watching my breathing. So I don't know if there is a special technique, or maybe I'm just doing it right, but I don't know. I think I'm struggling with this.
Yeah, you might need to do some breathing outside of meditation, where you just sit there with your eyes open, not necessarily doing anything with the mind, but just working on developing a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. I had to do this for several days before I could really combine it with the mind itself. It's just focus on getting a nice, well-developed breath. Because when I talk about not controlling the breath, people think that means that you're not doing anything with the breath, you just let the breath be. But this isn't actually true. If you hear me when I'm describing meditation, while we're actually meditating, I say develop a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath and not control it, right? Well, in order to get to that point, you are going to have to actively apply effort to get the breath to that point. There's some active training that you need to do, because if you just go with your natural breath, meaning what it is that you're doing right now, that's what people think when I say natural breath. They think just do whatever you're doing now. But that's not what I'm actually talking about. When I say develop a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath, it means that you're going to need to apply some work and effort to actually get the breath to be nice and gradual, slow and steady and at ease. And this takes a long time to be able to do this. Even though I was able to start combining the mind after about a week or so, after having done that breath training, it took me multiple years of meditation to get to the point where it was nice and slow and steady and gradual all the time. Because if my mind was overactive with a bunch of thoughts, I would sit down in meditation, and even though my prior meditation, my breath was just fine, now in this next meditation, my breath was more rapid and more shallow. And I needed to observe that and notice that, and now really slow it down. So you're not controlling the breath, but you are regulating the breath and bringing it to a nice, natural, gradual inhale and exhale. And there's going to need to be some effort that you do with the body and with the mind and get it to that point, and then maintain that for each individual meditation session long term.
Okay, thank you. This is very helpful. And do you have any advice or tips about how to train the breath outside meditation?
Yeah, what you would like to do is just sit there and just work on breathing really slow. Just and you might do that with your eyes open, and my nose is pretty stuffed up right now, so I think you guys could actually hear that. Could you hear that, Alberto?
Mhm.
You could? Yeah.
Yes.
So you would like that nice, gradual breath. The volume of each person's breath is going to be different because our lungs are going to be different, but the pace at which we breathe can be somewhat similar, where it's that nice, slow, gradual pace. And when you're taking that nice inhale, then there's going to be like a gap as you're transitioning to the exhale. And that's okay to focus on that gap for a couple of seconds and be comfortable with no breathing whatsoever. And then nice, slow, gradual exhale. And when you get to the bottom of that exhale, there's another gap there before you actually start breathing in again. So you're going to need to work with the breath in probably only 3, 5, 10 minutes. And then maybe you start doing some meditation, or maybe not. Maybe you just do some breath training where you just kind of work on breathing nice and slow, nice and gradual. And you're going to need to remind yourself about this in meditation, because even though you might practice like this on your own without the meditation, every once in a while you're going to notice you've got something in your mind that the mind's churning and spinning, and you're going to be in meditation 5-10 minutes into it, and you're like, oh my goodness, my breath is like way too fast here, I got to slow this down. So you got to learn how to really slow the breath down and be comfortable with that, because when you're focusing your mind on the breath, if your breath is really rapid and shallow, your mind's going to be bombarded with thoughts, lots of rapid thoughts. But if you can slow the breath down, and now your mind is fixated to the breath, it'll slow the mind down as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. All right, so it looks like Vibhav has a question.
Thank you, David. My question is kind of related to Alberto, like or your answer to it. When I started meditating, like in the last 6 months or so, I think in the beginning they trying to focus on the breath, like to the point where it seemed that you understand where the breath is going in and out of your nostril, or you can hear the sound, like focus on that one point. It's a very intense exercise in the beginning, so that you really feel the focus of the mind on that particular, try to get to that particular point. And then it takes about 10, 15, 20 minutes before the mind kind of becomes stable enough to then ease into have a natural, what you describe as a natural breath, where it just kind of stabilizes, and then it doesn't have to focus as hard. So is that that intense effort is what you're referring to when you say that you have to apply the mind to focus on that particular point, so that over time it just kind of then eases out?
Yeah, early on as you're building your practice, your focus and your amount of effort that you need to put on getting the breath to be nice and gradual, and the amount of effort that you need to put on getting the mind on the breath, it's quite intensive. That's why, like, the idea of doing a 8 or 12 hour meditation session, it's unrealistic, particularly for people who are just starting out. So there is a lot of effort to get the breath nice and gradual and then get the mind on the breath. I can easily say that it probably took me a good 3 to 4 years of meditating before I was able to get to the point where every single meditation, the breath was slow and gradual and steady. There was always times where I would catch myself not realizing that the breath had become rapid in that particular meditation, or that I had been doing it for like a week or two like that and not really realizing it. So you really need to pay attention to the breath and make sure you're getting that going. Sometimes what I would do is I would just sit there with my eyes open and breathing for like 2 or 3 minutes. And then once I felt like I got my breath really nice and gradual, then I would close my eyes, and that's where my meditation would actually start. So you really would like to get your breath synced up really nice and gradual, and then bring in the part with the mind. And that takes a lot of effort. Like I mentioned, it took me a good 3 to 4 years to get to the point where every single meditation was nice and gradual breath.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. So let's go to chapter 2. I think Samantha was volunteering for this one. So Samantha, if you'd like to read this next one, you're more than welcome to. And by the way, the first part of this one is very similar to the one that we just read. So if you notice here, all of this is exactly the same. And then what we'll end up doing is picking it up down here. The title and the heading, you're more than welcome to.
7 predicted fruits and benefits of breathing mindfulness meditation.
Okay.
Do you want me to go to the bottom or do this? Okay.
Okay, we'll do this one. Yep.
Okay.
Maybe this paragraph right here.
All right. What are the 7 fruits and benefits? 1. One attains final knowledge, wisdom early in this very life. 2. If one does not attain final knowledge early in this very life, then one attains final knowledge at the time of death. 3. If one does not attain final knowledge early in this very life or at the time of death, then with the complete destruction of the 5 lower fetters, one becomes an attainer of nibbana between one life and the next. 4. If one does not attain final knowledge early in this very life or at the time of death, or become an attainer of nibbana between one life and the next, then with the complete destruction of the lower 5 fetters, one becomes an attainer of nibbana upon landing. 5. If one does not attain final knowledge early in this very life or at the time of death, or become an attainer of nibbana between one life and the next, or become an attainer of nibbana upon landing, then with the complete destruction of the lower 5 fetters, one becomes an attainer of nibbana without extra effort. 6. If one does not attain final knowledge early in this very life or at the time of death, or become an attainer of nibbana between one life and the next, or become an attainer of nibbana upon landing, or become an attainer of nibbana without extra effort, then with the complete destruction of the 5 lower fetters, one becomes an attainer of nibbana with extra effort. 7. If one does not attain final knowledge early in this very life, or at the time of death, or become an attainer of nibbana between one life and the next, or become an attainer of nibbana upon landing, or become an attainer of nibbana without extra effort, or become an attainer of nibbana with extra effort, then with the complete destruction of the 5 lower fetters, one becomes one bound upstream, heading towards the heavenly realm. One monk's mindfulness of breathing has been developed and cultivated in this way. These 7 fruits and benefits may be predicted.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. So here, the first part of this discourse is what we just read in chapter 1, where the Buddha is guiding his students in meditation in the exact same way that he did previously. And then he describes the 7 types of benefits that one could experience as a result of training their mind with breathing mindfulness meditation. So that previous discourse, while it had 2 fruits and benefits, here he's adding these, which at least one of them is the same, but you can see here some additional benefits, that it's not just that you get to enlightenment or that you would just get to the 3rd stage of enlightenment, which is what we saw in the first discourse. And that's what we see here with number 1. This is him talking about getting to enlightenment. And then also down here, he's talking about getting to the 3rd stage of enlightenment. But now he's describing these other potential things that could occur as benefits of training the mind with breathing mindfulness meditation, that one could get to enlightenment at the time of death. that one could get to enlightenment between one life and the next, that the mind hasn't actually found the next existence, but it can experience enlightenment in that interim period. Or an individual could experience enlightenment upon landing, meaning getting into that next life. Like maybe you might think about like a miscarriage, or a being that is born and then maybe 2 months later they end up dying. They could actually get to enlightenment right upon landing into that new life. And now maybe for one reason or another, they actually get to enlightenment, and ultimately maybe the body didn't have what it needed to sustain life, but nonetheless they actually got to enlightenment. This is where you can see that these things aren't necessarily a tragedy when there's a miscarriage or individual being dies early in life. This could actually be that being getting to enlightenment, and then the body just couldn't sustain life for one reason or the other. So this is another option, that upon landing into that new life, one could actually attain enlightenment as well. And then the next one here is where now that a being has been reborn, that they get to enlightenment without extra effort. What this would be is somebody who's trained their mind in a previous life, and now those residual memories are coming into this next life. And because they have so much residual memories from their previous life, that there wasn't a whole lot of effort for them to get to enlightenment. There's some people who can actually make their way to enlightenment studying the actual true teachings with a guide and with a teacher within a matter of a few years, where another person might take a much longer, which is what the Buddha is talking about here in number 6, that both of these individuals are the same, and that they've eliminated the 5 lower fetters in their previous life. But because there wasn't as much residual memories that came over from those previous lives, this person actually took extra effort to be able to get to enlightenment. They might have had a much longer journey to be able to get to enlightenment. And then the 7th one here is where the Buddha is talking about one being reborn in the heavenly realm, and then they will get to enlightenment from there as well. And these are the 7 fruits and benefits that can be predicted. Essentially the 7 different ways that somebody could potentially make their way to enlightenment based on having done breathing mindfulness meditation, eliminated the 5 lower fetters, or in other cases you can see they would have eliminated all the fetters because they got to final knowledge. Let me know what questions you guys have here. It looks like Vibhav has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, David. I just had a question on the attaining nibbana between one life and the next. That is not clear to me.
So there's an interim period. You don't actually die and get reborn right away like some people think. You can have an elongated period during that time frame. I've seen 500, even 2,000 years between lives that can occur. So in that period of time, all we've got is a consciousness. All we've got is a mind. And now this mind on its own, having learned in a previous life the teachings, it can actually get to enlightenment in that time frame, that interim.
So can we think of this as the mind, so because it has already had the complete destruction of the 5 lower fetters, it just needs some additional things it needs to do to get to enlightenment? Is that the way to look at it?
Yeah, when you have eliminated the 5 lower fetters, you're at the point that's described as residual clinging. There's some kind of minor residual clinging at that point. When you're in the 3rd stage of enlightenment, you'll get discontent about once every 3 months, once every 6 months. It's very infrequent and it's very insignificant when it happens. It's usually like 3 seconds or 5 seconds, and right away the mind cuts it off and lets it go, and the mind's restored right back to its peacefulness and its joy. So there's just like this little bit of residual clinging that's still sticking around. It's kind of like there's a little bit of dust in the corners that hasn't quite been cleaned up yet. And this is why it's important that as you're moving through those stages of enlightenment, that you put the mind in different situations so that you don't allow that dust to settle in the corners. So when you've eliminated those 5 lower fetters, there's still some residual clinging there. There's still even potentially some conceit and things like this. But those things can be extinguished in this interim period because it's just very minor things that are still kind of holding on there.
Again, I don't think we've asked this before, but like the period between 2 different births, or even going to a different realm, and there's a few hundred years, you said, like where does the consciousness and mind actually live at that point? Is that just some pool of consciousness, that a stream of consciousness that like just circulating around the universe?
I have very minimal understanding of that. I don't have very much memories of that interim period. And the Buddha doesn't really talk about it either. I've only ever seen like maybe one discourse where he even kind of talks about it. It's called the Stations of Consciousness, where he kind of talks about this. But it's not something that is, widely taught, because what that is and how that occurs, it really doesn't matter, even though it's interesting to talk about. So pleased that you asked the question. It just doesn't really matter, because whether we know that information or we don't, it doesn't change the fact that right now the mind has pollution and you got to get it out in order to get to enlightenment. But there is some information like that. If you'd like to look through the book series, or you'd like me to send it to you, let me know. There's a place where the Buddha talks about stations of consciousness, but I don't really have very many memories of that in between time. So I don't teach it, and the Buddha didn't really teach it much either, because it doesn't really apply to whether you eliminate your discontentedness or not.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let me see if we have anything else. All right, I'm not seeing anything anywhere else. So let's go to chapter 3. This is a pretty long one here. Whoever reads this one, I'm going to need to pause you a few times to teach as we go through. Okay, it looks like Vibhav would like to read. Go ahead, sir.
Cultivating mindfulness of breathing fulfills 4 foundations of mindfulness, 7 factors of enlightenment, true wisdom and liberation. There is, monks, one thing which, when developed and cultivated, fulfills 4 things, and 4 things which, when developed and cultivated, fulfill 7 things, and 7 things which, when developed and cultivated, fulfill 2 things. Concentration by mindfulness of breathing mindfulness meditation, monks, is the one thing which, when developed and cultivated, fulfills the 4 foundations of mindfulness. The 4 foundations of mindfulness, when developed and cultivated, fulfill the 7 factors of enlightenment. The 7 factors of enlightenment, when developed and cultivated, fulfill true wisdom and liberation. Mindfulness of breathing fulfills the 4 foundations of mindfulness.
Let me pause you there, Vibhav. So this right here is a repeat of what we've already studied in chapter 1, where the Buddha is talking about how breathing mindfulness meditation fulfills the development of those 4 foundations of mindfulness. Being able to develop awareness of the bodily sensations, the feelings, the condition of the mind, and the mental objects. And I teach this in all the foundational teachings, in all the foundational classes and courses and retreats. So if you guys have questions on any of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, this is a great opportunity for you to ask those. But essentially what he's describing here is how your mind is developing those through this breathing mindfulness meditation. Because as you first get started, this is the first part of the meditation just to get started. Okay, and we just read that. Then you start to bring your awareness to understanding there are going to be bodily sensations, and now you calm those within the mind through cutting off and letting go. And this is helping you to develop that first foundation of mindfulness, to be aware of the bodily sensations. You don't focus on the bodily sensations. You don't scan the body to look at all these different things. You just cut off and let go, and that's what's going to calm those bodily sensations. Then as you're doing that, that's where the joy and the peacefulness comes up. But now you're going to start noticing this mental activity. This is where the feelings and the thoughts and the ideas are coming up. And this is where you're developing that foundation of mindfulness, where you're aware of the feelings. And now you're calming those. And when he says calming, in his other discourses, he says cut off and let go. That's what you would actually like to do, is just bring the mind back to the breath, yank it back to the breath. Then when you're experiencing the mind, that's developing that third foundation of mindfulness, which is experiencing the condition of the mind. And no matter what the condition is, you would like to be gladdening the mind, uplifting the mind. Then as you're doing this, this is where the mind's going to now start to be concentrated and focused more and more and more. And then this is where you're going to start experiencing certain mental objects. You're going to start seeing the personal existence view, the doubt, the wrong behavior and observances, the sensual desire, the ill will, the desire for form, desire for formless, conceit, restlessness, and ignorance. These are the 10 fetters. You're going to start noticing those symptoms. If you haven't studied the 10 fetters yet, when you get to that point, you'll be able to notice those mental objects, not only during meditation, but outside of meditation too. And that's where you're starting to liberate the mind from all of these mental objects, because now you have awareness of those mental objects and you're letting go and letting go and letting go. So now, having developed the breathing mindfulness meditation that leads to the development of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, you now get to this next piece, which this is just repeating all of these things over and over, and this is something we haven't read yet. Vibhav.
4 foundations of mindfulness fulfill the 7 factors of enlightenment. And how monks are the 4 foundations of mindfulness developed and cultivated so that they fulfill the 7 factors of enlightenment. Whenever a monk resides reflecting on the body as body, on that occasion unmuddled mindfulness is established in that monk. Whenever unmuddled mindfulness has been established in a monk, on that occasion the enlightenment factor of mindfulness is aroused by the monk. On that occasion the monk develops the enlightenment factor of mindfulness. On that occasion, the enlightenment factor of mindfulness goes to fulfillment by development in the monk. Reciting this mindfully, he penetrates that teaching with wisdom, examines it, makes an investigation of it. Whenever a monk reciting this mindfully penetrates that teaching with wisdom, examines it, makes an investigation of it, on that occasion, the enlightenment factor of investigation is aroused by the monk. On that occasion, the monk develops the enlightenment factor of investigation. On that occasion, the enlightenment factor of investigation goes to fulfillment by development in the monk. When he penetrates the teaching with wisdom, examines it, makes an investigation of it, his energy is aroused without slackening. Whenever a monk's energy is aroused without slackening as he penetrates the teaching with wisdom, examines it, makes an investigation of it, on that occasion the enlightenment factor of energy is aroused by the monk. On that occasion the monk develops the enlightenment factor of energy. On that occasion, the enlightenment factor of energy goes to fulfillment by development in the monk. When his energy is aroused, there arises in him joy. Whenever joy arises in a monk, whose vitality is aroused, on that occasion, the enlightenment factor of joy is aroused by the monk. On that occasion, the monk develops the enlightenment factor of joy. On that occasion, the enlightenment factor of joy goes to fulfillment by development in the monk. For one whose mind is uplifted by joy, the body becomes tranquil and the mind becomes tranquil. Whenever the body becomes tranquil and the mind becomes tranquil in a monk whose mind is uplifted by joy, on that occasion the enlightenment factor of tranquility is aroused by the monk. On that occasion the monk develops the enlightenment factor of tranquility. On that occasion the enlightenment factor of tranquility goes to fulfillment by development in that monk. For one whose body is tranquil and who is joyful, the mind becomes concentrated. Whenever the mind becomes concentrated in a monk whose body is tranquil and who is joyful, on that occasion the enlightenment factor of concentration is aroused by the monk. On that occasion the monk develops the enlightenment factor of concentration. On that occasion the enlightenment factor of concentration goes to fulfillment by development in the monk. He becomes one who closely looks on with equanimity at the mind thus concentrated. Whenever a monk becomes one who closely looks on with equanimity at the mind thus concentrated, on that occasion the enlightenment factor of equanimity is aroused by the monk. On that occasion the monk develops the enlightenment factor of equanimity. On that occasion the enlightenment factor of equanimity goes to fulfillment by development in the monk. Whenever a monk resides reflecting on feelings as feelings, mind as mind, mental objects as mental objects, on that occasion unmuddled mindfulness is established in the monk. Whenever unmuddled mindfulness has been established in the monk, on that occasion the enlightenment factor of mindfulness is aroused by the monk. On that occasion the monk develops the enlightenment factor of mindfulness. On that occasion the enlightenment factor of mindfulness goes to fulfillment by development in the monk. The remaining 3 foundations of mindfulness should be elaborated as in the case of the first foundation of mindfulness. He becomes one who closely looks on with equanimity as the mind thus concentrated. Whenever a monk becomes one who closely looks on with equanimity as the mind thus concentrated, on that occasion the enlightenment factor of equanimity is aroused by the monk. On that occasion the monk develops the enlightenment factor of equanimity. On that occasion the enlightenment factor of equanimity goes to fulfillment by developing the monk. It is when the four foundations of mindfulness are developed and cultivated in this way, that they fulfill the seven factors of enlightenment.
Okay, so let me teach this and then we'll move on to the next piece. So once the four foundations of mindfulness are developed, where you have awareness of the bodily sensations, awareness of the feelings, the condition of the mind, and the mental objects, this is where you can start developing the seven factors of enlightenment. These are tools to fine-tune the mind and bring it either out of a sluggish condition or out of an excited condition. Sometimes because of the term here, the seven factors of enlightenment, people think that this is what determines whether you are enlightened or you aren't enlightened. But instead, what this is it's a tool to fine-tune the mind. The first factor of enlightenment is mindfulness, which is the same mindfulness from the Eightfold Path. You would like to develop that mindfulness or awareness of mind, because then whenever the mind is sluggish, you can start investigating the teachings, because that's the opposite of what the mind wants to do. When the mind's dull and lethargic and complacent, it doesn't want to investigate the teachings. It's not interested in coming to the temple or coming to class online or reading a book or whatever else it might be. The mind kind of pushes those things away. So you would like to arise this effort to be able to move towards investigation of the teachings, to lift that mind out of that sluggish condition. Because if you leave it down there in that sluggish condition, the mind just stays wired that way. So you would like to lift it up as soon as possible so it doesn't dwell down in that sluggish condition, because otherwise it just stays wired that way. And now when you start investigating the teachings and you start seeing the answers to the very questions that you've had for so many years in your life and in so many years before this life, that now this energy starts to arise in the mind. This is the third factor of enlightenment. This is the third tool, that you're now noticing this energy starting to arise up in the mind. And then there's this joy. This is the fourth one. This is the unconditioned gladness, or that unconditioned happiness, or the joy, where the mind becomes uplifted because you've uplifted it out of that sluggish, dull condition into the middle. But then as you're doing that, you might notice with your mindfulness that the mind is experiencing this overactivity, or this heightened state of excitement. And when you're noticing that, you would like to bring in the tranquility, the concentration, and the equanimity, because that's what's going to bring it to the middle out of that excited state. Because if your mind stays wired like that, in that excited, overactive state, it's just going to keep firing that way. So you might notice that you tend to live on one side of this. You might tend to stay in the dull, lethargic state more frequently, or you might notice that you tend to stay in that high and uplifted state. And some people think that that's what you're actually shooting for, but that's not actually what you're shooting for with your mind bouncing all over the place. Oftentimes you might have rapid speech, your thoughts are, cascading so quickly you can't even get your tongue and your lips moving fast enough to be able to articulate the things that are going on in your mind. And that's why you would like to slow that breath down during meditation, so that it can slow the mind down and bring in this tranquility, this concentration, and this equanimity, because you're not interested in allowing the mind to continue to fire like that. So whenever you notice with your mindfulness that the mind is dull or lethargic, you bring in the investigation, the energy, and the joy. Whenever you notice the mind is overactive or excited, you bring in the tranquility, the concentration, and the equanimity, and now the mind can stay in that middle longer and longer and longer. And this is one of the analogies I use with the wood and the steel rod, that when you grind that steel rod and the wood back and forth, initially it's going to bounce around a lot. But if you get a nice groove going in that wood, eventually it's not going to bounce out anymore, because you've got this deep groove there. But if you allow your mind to stay on one side or the other, you're not getting that groove. So you'd like to be sure to use these seven factors of enlightenment to fine-tune the mind and bring it into the middle, so you can get a nice groove with the mind and it can get really deep into that focus and concentration. By the time you get to enlightenment, you will be practicing all seven factors of enlightenment. On your way to enlightenment, you're going to need to invoke the various factors that you need at any given time to bring the mind to the middle. You should always be practicing mindfulness. You should always be practicing that from the moment you're first starting to wake up, all day long, and as you're going to sleep at night, so that as your thoughts might try to invade the mind, you can take action to fix it. But then at any point that you notice the mind is sluggish, you need to lift it up with investigation, energy, and joy. And when you notice it's excited and overactive, bring it to the middle with the tranquility, the concentration, and the equanimity. And then keep it there for longer and longer periods, and eventually it won't ever pop out. Okay? So now let's go to this part, Vibhav.
7 factors of enlightenment fulfill true wisdom and liberation. How, monks, are the 7 factors of enlightenment developed and cultivated so that they fulfill true wisdom and liberation? Here, monks, a monk develops the enlightenment factor of mindfulness, which is based upon seclusion, freedom from strong feelings, and elimination, maturing and release. He develops the enlightenment factor of investigation, which is based upon seclusion, freedom from strong feelings, and elimination, maturing and release. He develops the enlightenment factor of energy, which is based upon seclusion, freedom from strong feelings, and elimination, maturing and release. He develops the enlightenment factor of joy, which is based upon seclusion, freedom from strong feelings, and elimination, maturing and release. He develops the enlightenment factor for tranquility, which is based upon seclusion, freedom from strong feelings, and elimination, maturing and release. He develops the enlightenment factor of concentration, which is based upon seclusion, freedom from strong feelings, and elimination, maturing and release. He develops the enlightenment factor of equanimity, which is based upon seclusion, freedom from strong feelings, and elimination, maturing and release. It is, monks, when the 7 factors of enlightenment are developed and cultivated in this way, that they fulfill true wisdom and liberation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So now, having developed a meditation practice, which is going to help you to develop the 4 foundations of mindfulness, being aware of the bodily sensations, the feelings, the condition of the mind, and the mental objects. And now you've developed the 7 factors of enlightenment to know where to lift the mind up or to bring it down into the middle. Now the mind is going to mature and mature and mature, and it's going to release the cravings, desires, attachments that is keeping it in this sluggish, dull condition, or it's taking it to this excited and overactive state. That's what the Buddha is talking about here. And this is what's going to lead to your enlightenment, that you're fine-tuning the mind here, right? So as you're developing all these tools, the mind's maturing and maturing and maturing, and eventually it's going to release those cravings that are keeping it in the complacency, the sluggish condition, the dullness, the lethargic condition. But also there's cravings that are taking it into that excited and overactive state as well. So as the mind matures and it releases these cravings, that's what's actually going to fulfill this true wisdom and lead to liberation, where the mind is actually enlightened. Okay, so he's walking you through piece by piece by piece and showing you how breathing mindfulness meditation leads to the development of 4 foundations of mindfulness, which leads to development of the 7 factors of enlightenment, which leads to enlightenment itself, this cause and effect relationship. And it all starts with that breathing mindfulness meditation practice in this particular sequence. So any questions here on this chapter? Okay, it looks like we have some questions coming in on Facebook. Francis is asking, what does it mean based in seclusion? So during the lifetime of the Buddha, he would encourage students who had developed for several years to go off into the forest and live alone, because oftentimes the mind is attached and wants to be with people all the time, and it only feels comfortable when you're with other people. But in order to be able to get to the point where your mind's liberated, you need to be just as comfortable and enjoy your time with other people as you do when you're alone. So if you go off and experience seclusion, you're going to be able to train your mind to be comfortable and enjoy the time that you're spending alone. Because if you don't enjoy spending time with yourself, why would anybody ever enjoy spending time with you, right? You got to think about that, right? So during the time of the Buddha, it was going off into the forest, which isn't realistic for a lot of us today, particularly in the household life. So what you can do instead is you can do this in little spurts, where maybe you go out to a nice restaurant and you go out alone, even though other people are going out with couples, and even though other people might be with a group of friends. You train your mind to be comfortable going out to this nice restaurant and spending a little bit of money on yourself and just eat dinner alone, right? Or go to the mall and spend time alone, just walking around the mall, doing some shopping or whatever it is, having some food and enjoying that time alone. And then maybe even going on holiday or vacation alone, where you travel all by yourself. You don't need somebody there with you. Whether it's for a few days or a few weeks, you can learn to be alone and be comfortable with that alone time, because oftentimes people aren't comfortable with that. So that's how you can do it today, where you don't have to go off and be in the forest. Because even though people would go off into the forest during the lifetime of the Buddha, they still came in contact with people because they needed to get food. They would come out each day in order to be able to get food. So they still interacted with other people. So you can simulate the same exact experience in that kind of way. Francis has some more here. He says, does one develop the 7 factors of enlightenment during meditation or outside of meditation that is developed or practice these 7 factors on one's daily life? It's actually both. That it's meditation that's leading to the development of the 7 factors of enlightenment, but then it's during your day-to-day life that you're actually practicing these as well. So it's both. So without the meditation, you wouldn't be able to develop your mindfulness or awareness of mind. So now in day-to-day life, when you're sluggish or you're overactive and excited, you wouldn't actually see it. You wouldn't have the mindfulness to know, to bring in either investigation, energy, or joy, or to bring in the tranquility, concentration, or equanimity. So it's the meditation that's the catalyst or the catapult that's helping you to be able to develop these qualities, but then it's in day-to-day life that you're actually practicing them and implementing them. Mayuli has a question here. She says, I find that the more mindful this mind becomes, the more pollution this mind notices. Yes, absolutely. The subtle pollution surfaces. I'm constantly fighting with the mind, which causes headaches, is exhausting. Is this normal? Or am I overshooting the mind? No, you go through these periods of time where this is the case, but don't take it so seriously sometimes. Just laugh at yourself and just laugh and just have fun. Don't be so intense all the time and focusing on it so intensely. But this is normal because your mindfulness is becoming more and more developed. You're going to start noticing the subtleties of little tiny things that you didn't notice at other times. But don't take it so seriously and look at it such a big daunting task. Instead, just be like, oh wow, I did never noticed that before. I'm going to need to get to that. Excellent. I'm glad I've seen that. Right? So this is normal, but just don't take it so seriously and don't crave it to be any different than it is. And then you won't experience those headaches and the burden of carrying around this craving of, I've got to be perfect today. That's not what you're interested in. You're interested in understanding that over a consistent long-term period, you're gradually training the mind and gradually working towards improvement. Okay, looks like Leo has a question, and we'll go to Josh after that.
Yeah, thank you. I just would like to understand why the Buddha used the word calming instead of cutting off and letting go. Or sometimes he also used the word calming, you said, or we have read. Is there a similarity to this word, to cutting off and letting go? I don't see it right now.
Yeah, he in his other discourses, he talks about cutting off and letting go. Here, the word calming is being used. But in other discourses, he uses cutting off and letting go. And that's what you would actually like to do. Because that's what you need to be doing in day-to-day life, is when any discontent feelings are arising, you need to cut off and let go. So he's using different words in different places. And perhaps we're translating the word in a way that is different than what he said it. He might have even used cutting off here, but it ended up getting translated in this way. But for sure, I can assure you that cutting off and letting go is what you would like to be doing.
Okay, so calming would be not the right word for us. If we think, okay, calm down, calming. No, this is not. It's about cutting off and letting go. It's something different than calming. Yeah, I see that.
You're not gradually like kind of calming the mind, like slowly and surely. You would like it to be a very abrupt cut, and that's what you would like to be able to do and get the mind to so that it's just automatically responding to that in that way. So in this situation, the word calming is being used, but I didn't change this one, or I might have changed it. I'll have to go back and look to see whether it was calming and I changed it to calming, but I know that it wasn't cutting off and letting go. But in his other discourses, the term cutting off and letting go is used, and I can assure you that that's what you need to do.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Josh, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so I find myself expecting these 7 factors to include a component of love and compassion, or some emotional warmth, and instead they seem to emphasize balancing wisdom and serenity and equanimity. Do the 7 factors then lead to metta and compassion?
If you're practicing the 7 factors, it's maturing the mind so that you get rid of your cravings, desires, attachments. It's purifying the mind. And then that's where those other qualities are going to be experienced, because you're also doing things like loving kindness meditation and cutting off and letting go in daily life anytime anger or frustration or agitation is coming up. So these are tools that you're using to purify the mind more fully and really fine-tune it, so that then those qualities that you're talking about start to shine through more and more.
I see. So then by design, these are more mind-based and to be used in conjunction with loving compassion meditation, which in conjunction opens the mind, opens the heart.
Yeah, there's different tools that are invoked for different purposes. So here, whenever the Buddha is talking about breathing mindfulness meditation, it's to eliminate craving, desire, attachment. That's what the purpose of breathing mindfulness meditation is, that unwholesome quality. And to cultivate mindfulness or awareness of mind, and to cultivate the concentration. So this whole sequence of things that he's talking about here, this is all to eliminate craving, desire, attachment out of the mind. And if you do that, you'll automatically have less anger and hatred and bitterness and hostility in the mind, because there's not the cravings in the mind. But of course, you still need to have the loving kindness meditation, and you need to still arise loving kindness in your day-to-day life. But this is just kind of like one aspect. If you remember those 3 poisons that you learned about, the craving, the anger, the ignorance, this whole sequence of events here that he's talking about, all these series of tools, is targeting the craving. And then in terms of targeting the anger and getting that out, it's the loving kindness meditation and practicing loving kindness in day-to-day life. And these things are essentially getting to the same result, which is a purified mind. But there's multiple aspects of the mind that need to be purified. You can't just do one thing, and all the different tools aren't incorporated at the exact same time. This is where you need to be able to have such mindfulness that you can see the symptoms that is going on in your mind, and then apply whatever tool you need at any given time. So whenever it's craving, desire, attachment, it's always cut it off, cut it off, cut it off, let it go. And then whenever it's anger, of course, that's part of what you would like to cut off, but it's also arising this loving kindness, this genuine interest in seeing all beings be well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let me see if we have anything else. All right, I don't see anything else. So let's go to the next one, which should be chapter 4. Let's see, is there someone who would like to read this one? I think this might be very similar to the last one. We've got some really long chapters here this week. This is very similar to the last one. I'm going to skip over it and just see if you guys have any questions, because here this is the Buddha going through the similar things, but he's doing it in a more detailed description, and he's talking about some moral conduct here. And then Josh, for you might decide to read this one too, because in here he also talks about how you're developing loving kindness and compassion and sympathetic joy as well, which is leading to the purification of the mind. So one of the ways to think about these tools that the Buddha is talking about is, if you understand that the enlightened mind is the natural mind, and it already has all these qualities of loving kindness and compassion and sympathetic joy and equanimity and all these other things, and when you use these tools that the Buddha is teaching you and you clear out this pollution, these qualities can start shining through more and more, and you can start experiencing these qualities more and more. So these tools and these techniques that he's giving you is showing you how to get rid of that pollution so that these natural qualities can start shining through. You still need to apply effort to cultivate things like loving kindness and compassion and sympathetic joy and equanimity and things like this. But once you clear out all this pollution and you get the mind purified, these qualities will be shining through because they'll be fully developed. But if you guys would like to read this on your own and you have any questions, because it's quite long here and it actually is going to go through some of the same things that we just talked about, but in a little bit more of a longer form and a lot more detail. So does anybody have any questions on this from maybe your reading prior to class, so that way we don't go so long today by reading this entire chapter? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So now let's go to this next one. This is chapter 5, and it looks like Pat would like to read that one. So go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Reflecting on the body as a body. And how, monks, does a monk reside reflecting on the body as a body? Here, a monk, gone to the forest or to the foot of a tree or to an empty hut, sits down, having folded his legs crosswise, set his body erect, and established mindfulness in front of him. Ever mindful, he breathes in. Mindful, he breathes out. Breathing in long, he understands, I breathe in long. Or breathing out long, he understands, I breathe out long. Breathing in short, he understands, I breathe in short. Or breathing out short, he understands, I breathe out short. He trains thus, I shall breathe in, experiencing the whole body. He trains thus, I shall breathe out, experiencing the whole body. He trains thus, I shall breathe in, calming the bodily sensations. He trains thus, I shall breathe out, calming the bodily sensations. Just as a skilled turner, or his apprentice, then making a long turn, understands, I make a long turn. Or when making a short turn, understands, I make a short turn. So too, breathing in long, a monk understands, I breathe in long. He trains thus, I shall breathe out, calming the bodily sensations. In this way, he resides reflecting on the body as a body internally, or he resides reflecting on the body as a body externally, or he resides reflecting on the body as a body both internally and externally. Or else he resides reflecting on the body its arising factors, or he resides reflecting on the body its vanishing factors, or he resides reflecting on the body both its arising and vanishing factors. Or else mindfulness that there is a body is simply established in him to the extent necessary for bare wisdom and mindfulness. And he resides independent, not clinging to anything in the world. That is how a monk resides reflecting on body as a body. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pat. So this is the Buddha calling out how to develop the awareness of the bodily sensations. He's basically chunking out the part of that longer discussion on how he guides students in meditation and showing you what part of that is actually helping you to develop awareness of the bodily sensations. So I teach this when I'm teaching you guys breathing mindfulness meditation, that if you notice that little itching in the body, that you know that it's impermanent, and you avoid, constantly itching those little itches and scratches. But if you have that urge where after 5 seconds or so you just got to itch it, like, okay, go ahead and itch it. But now try to make it longer, 8, 10, 12 seconds. And now if you've got to itch it, okay, go ahead and itch it. But each time make it longer and longer, where you can get to the point where you're not disturbed or disrupted in your meditation by a little itch on the body here and there. That you know that the itch is there perhaps, but it arises, it changes, and it fades away. And you're not affected by that impermanence. Because what the mind's going to have is it's going to have a craving for permanent comfort of the body. And when that little itch comes up, you're going to want that permanent comfort. So you're going to want to itch and scratch. But if you can get comfortable with understanding that that itch is impermanent and it arises, changes, and fades away, and internally within your own mind, you can cut that off and let it go, well, now you're developing that foundation of mindfulness of being aware of the bodily sensations and be able to internally redirect your mind and cut that off and let it go. And that's what you would like to develop in your meditation, so that now you can do it in day-to-day life. That when you're noticing these bodily sensations associated with some craving, desire, attachment that's getting triggered, and you're noticing the chest is tightening, the throat is tightening, the face is getting hot, the head pressure and the skull is getting more and more strong, that's that early warning system alerting you that you're about to get upset, you're about to get angry or frustrated, and you can cut that off and let it go. And that's what will rewire your mind, where you're not allowing the mind to form this conditioned feeling, but instead you're reverting the mind. So that bodily sensations are the mind saying, I'm about to form a conditioned feeling. I'm about to form a conditioned feeling. I'm about to form a conditioned feeling. I'm about to form a conditioned feeling here. And you're like, nope, not going to let you do that. Sorry, you're not going to get that. And now when you cut that off, the mind can get to the point where it's not forming its feelings based on some external thing. And even though there's no secret to meditation, or there's no secret to the path to enlightenment, the real key to focus in on is the conditioned pleasant feelings. It makes complete sense to you to cut off your anger and your sadness and frustration, the guilt, the shame, the fear, the stress, the anxiety, the loneliness, the boredom. It makes complete sense to do that. But these conditioned pleasant feelings of happiness, excitement, elation, thrill, exhilaration, euphoria, you need to get ahead of the curve and cut those off. If you're not cutting those off, then the painful feelings are waiting for you right around the corner. Because if you get so happy that it's sunny outside, and you allow the mind to form that conditioned feeling, that means when it rains, you're going to get sad. And maybe you cut off the sad feeling, but you still experienced it because of that pleasant one, that you allowed the mind to get that. So you need to be willing to see that these conditioned pleasant feelings are just as much a part of the problem as the painful ones. And that's how you really get ahead of the curve on this, that you're cutting off the conditioned pleasant feelings so that you can then experience the unconditioned joy and happiness and the gladness in the mind, the cheerfulness and the brightness. Then the Buddha is giving this analogy here where he's talking about just like an apprentice understands this turning, this long turning and this short turning, you need to be able to understand that the breath is either long or short, and that you can calm these bodily sensations. You need to be able to see those bodily sensations and cut them off and let them go, not allowing the mind to be affected by them. And you're doing this internally within the mind, that you're noticing that there's an external bodily sensation, but it's internal within your mind that you're cutting that off and you're letting it go. And this is where the mind develops that mindfulness, the wisdom to know that you need to cut off the bodily sensations, and the mindfulness to be aware that they're happening so that then you can actually cut them off. And then more and more, you get to the point where you're not clinging to anything in this world. So those pleasant feelings, we usually call the bodily sensations associated with those in some cultures, we call them warm fuzzies. And it's like, oh, I got those warm fuzzies. They feel so good, right? This is the mind clinging to it. You would like to get to the point where, no, you know that that's unwise to allow the mind to experience that and cut that off so that you can get to the unconditioned joy. Because if you keep allowing your mind to indulge in that pleasantness, that temporary pleasantness, you're never going to get to the permanent happiness and the permanent joy. So it looks like we have several questions here. It looks like Samantha's first. Go ahead, ma'am.
Hi, I was reading through this week your discussion of this chapter. And there's a paragraph that says, if the mind chases after pleasant feelings, then when those conditions do not exist due to impermanence, etc., etc. I started thinking about that, and I was having some trouble trying to discern whether some feelings are pleasant or like gratitude. So just as an example, if I were to go shopping and came upon a parking spot right near the front door of a store, my initial feeling would be one of gratitude. I would not have been upset if the parking spot had not been there, but am I fooling myself in thinking that it's not a pleasant, conditioned feeling rather than just gratitude, or are they one and the same? Because I would not have been upset if the parking spot had not been there.
Mhm. Okay, so gratitude is a quality of mind. It's an unconditioned quality. It's a quality that is there. It's not a feeling, because you can have gratitude like all day long. It doesn't arise, change, or fade away. Like I have enormous amounts of gratitude for all the people that have been helping me to be able to share these teachings throughout the world, and you guys have just practiced an enormous amount of generosity, and there's nothing but gratitude that's always been there for all the students, but it's always there. It doesn't arise, it doesn't change, it doesn't fade away. There's just always gratitude. But what you might be experiencing is you might be experiencing an arising of a pleasant feeling that is associated with you getting that parking spot. And that's the conditioned pleasant feeling that you'd like to cut off. But you won't cut off any of the gratitude because that's unconditioned. It's just always there. It's a mental quality that's always there.
Okay, but since it's arisen because I had the great parking space, it really is a conditioned feeling.
Yeah, you might be describing it as gratitude, but it probably is something like happiness or excitement or, oh wow, look at me, I got this parking space. Oh, this is so wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, and now that's the conditioned feeling that the mind's having, and you would like to cut that off. But then what you're going to be left with, which is what you would like to get to, is the gratitude. And that's what's going to be there in an unconditioned way as a permanent mental quality that's just always there all the time.
Okay. And I had a second part to that, and I think it was maybe Maya Lee that had mentioned this before about, was it she who mentioned having headaches sometimes from focusing too hard?
Yep.
So during the day, is it, you mentioned having to be mindful 100% of the time. Is it better to focus or work on cutting off pleasant versus unpleasant versus kind of neither, or conditioned feelings all the time, or just one at a time to kind of give yourself like bite-sized pieces that are a little easier to manage? And I think you kind of answered that in that you said not to take it, so seriously. It shouldn't be painful. It shouldn't be like a full-time job. I'm just wondering if there's a way to not make it feel like it's something that takes over my entire life.
Yeah, it is a full-time job, Samantha, getting to Enlightenment. It is a full-time job. But how much seriousness you put on it is a personal choice, right? Yeah. From the moment you're waking up until the moment you go to bed, you need to have that mindfulness and awareness of mind. But if you're dealing with a lot of different cravings, desires, attachments, you would like to break it down and focus on maybe 2 or 3 of them, because maybe you have 100 of them, right? And it's like, oh man, this would just be way too much to be really focused on all of these things. So you kind of get your arms around these 2 or 3 and you get some success there, like low-hanging fruit. And then when you realize that those cravings are gone and you see the benefit to your mind, then you focus on the next ones and the next ones and the next ones. But you would like to stay attentive to the mind that if these particular cravings arise at any point during your day, you're going to cut them off and let them go. Even though you know there's these other ones there, you're just not ready to deal with them right now, because otherwise you can get bombarded with these things.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, looks like Marcy has a question.
Thank you, Teacher David. So in my morning meditation, my female cat likes to come and kind of keeps tapping me in the nose. And during my meditation, what I do is I just let it go and just don't pay any attention in doing that. So, but my question is I know she's doing it because she wants me to get up and feed her. So when the Buddha talks about setting up mindfulness, I know he says setting up awareness of the mind, getting the body prepared. You might want to empty the bladder, do these things. Would meeting her craving to be fed prior to going into meditation, would that be considered setting up mindfulness? Or should I continue to just say, let her keep trying to, tap me in the face and just keep doing the meditation through that? What would you recommend?
That's not necessarily setting up mindfulness. That's just could potentially be a wise decision, right? You can look at it in two different ways. You can say, hey, I really need to get some meditation in here, and I'm not interested in her doing this, so I'm going to feed her first. You could look at it that way. Another way you could look at it is say, hey, no, this is actually helping me in my meditation because it's requiring me to stay more focused or more concentrated. And it's requiring my cat to let go of her craving of me to always be feeding her at a particular time, which is going to help her get to a better existence in her next life. So it depends on how you look at it, and each day you might do that a little bit differently.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you, Teacher David.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. I think I see some questions here from Mayuli and Francis. I have a follow-up question from Samantha's question. I have been practicing a lot of generosity lately, and it make this mind feel joyful. I am assuming that's conditioned feeling. Do I want to cut that off, or should I let that in to encourage more generosity? You're not interested in conditioned happiness related to generosity, because then when you're not practicing generosity, you'll feel sad or frustrated. But if it's unconditioned joy, which can be the case, because when you're practicing generosity, you're letting go of craving, desire, attachment, and unconditioned joy can actually spring up in your mind as you're practicing generosity, then you can try to cut that off, but you're not going to be able to. So just like I was sharing with Marcy, you can try to cut it off, and if it's not easily being cut off, then there's the potential that it's unconditioned joy. But also, you would like to notice whether there's bodily sensations associated with it. If there's bodily sensations associated with it, it's conditioned happiness. It's not unconditioned joy. And yes, cut that off. And more, you can just be joyful all the time. And you're not joyful because of the generosity. What's actually occurring is the generosity is training the mind to eliminate its craving. And now, because of that, that's where the joy is starting to spring up. Francis is asking, when I experience a bit of itch on my body during meditation, I tell myself this itch is not me, not mine, and not myself. After a short time, I do not get agitated by the itch. Eventually, I do not notice this itch anymore. Am I doing this correctly? Yes. That's what you would like to get to, where it just doesn't affect anything and you can just stay focused on the breath the entire time during the meditation. Or, of course your mind's going to come off sometimes, but you're not itching yourself. That's what I mean by that. Okay. So now we can go to the next chapters. Is there someone who would like to read chapter 6? Okay, Leo, go ahead, sir.
Mindfulness of the body. Here a monk, gone to the forest, or to the foot of a tree, or to an empty hut, sits down, having folded his legs cross-right, set his body erect, then established mindfulness in front of him. Ever mindful, he breathes in, mindful, he breathes out. Breathing in long, he understands, I breathe in long. Or breathing out long, he understands, I breathe out long. Breathing in short, he understands, I breathe in short. Or breathing out short, he understands, I breathe out short. He trains thus, I shall breathe in, experiencing the whole body. He trains thus, I shall breathe out, experiencing the whole body. He trains thus, I shall breathe in, calming the body, sensation. He trains thus, I shall breathe out, calming the body sensations. As he resides thus diligent, dedicated, and determined, his memories and thoughts, based on the thousand life, are abandoned. With their abandoning, his mind becomes still, internally quieted, brought to singleness and concentration. That is how a monk develops mindfulness of the body.
Okay, thank you, Leo. So here, this is the part that we've been studying here, where the Buddha is teaching you about how to develop mindfulness of the body and those bodily sensations. The piece that's being added here that you haven't seen yet is where he's talking about abandoning these thoughts and memories of the household life, because people were leaving behind their household life and coming to join him. So maybe as they're meditating, maybe these thoughts and memories of their family, or maybe they were having sexual encounters when they were in the household life, or maybe there was a certain food that they could always select and that was there for them whenever they wanted it. Maybe these thoughts were coming up in their mind while they were meditating, and the Buddha is teaching you to cut those off and let those go, abandon those, get those out of the mind, not long and yearn for the things of the past. That's the way you should think about this, is that whenever you're noticing the mind longing and yearning for these things of the past, cut that off and let it go. Steady the mind internally, quiet it, bring it to singleness, and concentrate the mind. This is what you'd like to do. When you see your mind wandering around, steady it internally, quiet it, bring it to singleness, and concentrate the mind. Any of those thoughts that are coming up in the mind, abandon those. That's what he's talking about here. By the time you get to enlightenment, you're always going to remember the things that were going on in your life, but you're no longer going to be forming feelings on those things. So if you had really pleasant things happening in your childhood or your early adulthood or what have you, you'll know those things that happen, but you won't be longing, yearning for those things. Or if you had very painful things that were happening in your childhood or your early adulthood, you'll still remember that those things occurred when you get to enlightenment, but your mind won't be forming inner feelings based on that. So you won't have painful feelings now in the present moment based on things that happened in your past. Your mind would have let those things go, but you'll still remember that they've actually occurred. And that's what the Buddha is teaching you to do, is to abandon any kind of holding on to those things so that your mind doesn't form feelings based on it right now in the present moment. Looks like Marcy has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Teacher David, thank you. So one of the things I noticed in my breathing mindfulness meditation is when the mind becomes aware that the mind has veered off the breathing, it automatically will take a deep breath and then slowly let that breath out and then start to refocus on that breath. Is that something that the mind is doing to cut off that thought, that reaction of that deep breath? Or is that just I'm just doing it intentionally? I don't know if I'm asking the correct question here, if you're interested.
I'm not understanding 100%.
So basically, let me give you an example. Because I have this meeting coming up with one of my clients, during my meditation, I have noticed that the mind will start to ruminate on the conversation of how to say something. And then I noticed that the body, when the mind notices that I've gone off the breath and I'm now ruminating about this conversation, it automatically will take, and then it goes back into trying to gradually focus on the breath.
Okay.
Is that normal? Is that the body or the mind's way of cutting off? Instead of saying cutting it off, it does a physical reaction, I guess.
Yeah, there's no harm in doing that, and you might do that for a period of time, and that can help you to release it from the mind. So you don't need to force the mind and the body to do it any other way, but ultimately you would like to get to the point where you're internally cutting off and letting go. Because in your day-to-day life, you're not going to always be able to do the right? Because what you're doing is developing this permanent practice. Even though we understand the universal truth of impermanence and things are constantly changing, by the time you get to enlightenment, your mind's performing optimally, permanently, that you've built this permanent practice. You treat everybody the same. You're functioning exactly the same way. This is why the mind's at ease. No matter whether you're in Egypt or the USA or Germany or Spain or Italy or Thailand, you're always polite, kind, friendly, and respectful, and you're practicing these teachings flawlessly in all these different situations. And in these situations where, a taxi driver maybe has said, "Oh, you owe me more money, you didn't give me enough money," you're not interested in right? So you're not interested in doing that. So if that's what you're doing now, okay, but you would like to get to the point where just internally you can just be steady and at ease, and you can just quietly cut it off internally within the mind.
Thank you, Teacher David. That's what I was struggling with, because I almost felt like you said it was a permanent thing that was happening, where it was a way of trying to let go. But it's better if I mentally make that cut off.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yep, you're welcome. Okay, looks like Leo has a question as well.
Yeah, maybe you just explain it, but what I sometimes, for me, for example, this cutting off and letting go, or this cutting off, makes sense in case of body sensations, like sometimes with the hands, let me cut it off. But when I do meditation, I don't know, for me sometimes it sounds a bit useless, this word cutting off, because if I'm in a thought and I realize that I'm in the thought, just come back to the breath. Isn't it this way? Why to say cutting off? Or isn't this, you know what I mean? For me, it's just, okay, I'm in the thought, and then I realize that, oh, I'm in the thought, come back, and I'm back. Right back into the breathing.
Okay.
The focus on the breathing. Isn't it this?
So do you like the word come back to the breath better?
Yeah.
Okay, so do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. But you are cutting it off. That's what you're doing. You're cutting that off. But if in your mind, coming back to the breath is what you need to be thinking in order to get your mind to do that, then do it.
Should I even think? Do I need to think that? Or isn't it just coming back? I mean, I'm in thought thinking about this and that, and I realize back to the breath.
Yeah, you're coming back to the breath, but the Buddha's giving you that directive to be able to see exactly what you need to do, which is cut that off. You're not easing go, you're not observing your thoughts, you're not looking at your thoughts, you're not scanning the body and looking at everything and trying to figure it all out. You're just cutting it off and letting it go. And that's what's going to train your mind to let these things go. Because ultimately, when you do this enough, your mind's going to do it automatically. You're not even going to have to think about it. That in your day-to-day life, someone will cut you off in your traffic, for example. You'll notice the bodily sensations and your mind will just automatically cut it off without you even thinking about it, because your mind has gotten so responsive to that. And it takes many years to get to that point, but you'll get to that point where you don't even have to think about it, that the mind just does it automatically. There's not even any effort behind it. But initially, and as you're getting going, you've got to put a lot of effort behind it. So whatever words work for you to be able to get to that point, then use that. But what you are doing is cutting it off and letting it go.
Okay. It's like a shift. I'm in thoughts, but as you said, there will be a point where just there's a thought and then boom, I'm back at the breath, and there's nothing else from the thought anymore in my mind going around.
Exactly. It's that analogy. You guys are going to see it in this book where there's this post and this pillar and the animals are pulling, they're tied to this post and pillar, and these wild animals are pulling. And when they get to the end of the rope, they get yanked back to the post and pillar. Well, if that animal pulls and yanks enough, eventually it's just going to sit down calmly by the post and pillar, because it knows it can't pull and yank anymore because it keeps getting yanked back. And your mind's the same way. If you keep yanking it back and yanking it back and yanking it back, or cutting it off and cutting it off and cutting it off, your mind's going to eventually realize, oh my goodness, I can't do this anymore. He's not going to let me pull. So why would I even do it? So your mind just sits down quietly and it stays steady and quieted.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So let's move on to the next chapter. This is chapter 7. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, Keely, and then we'll go to Yihang, and then Marcy after that. Got our next 3 lined up.
Mindfulness of breathing leads exclusively to Nibbana, enlightenment. Monks, there is one thing that, when developed and cultivated, leads exclusively to liberation, to freedom from strong feelings, to elimination, to peace, to direct knowledge, experience, to enlightenment, to Nibbana. What is that one thing? Mindfulness of breathing mindfulness meditation. This is that one thing that, when developed and cultivated, leads exclusively to liberation, to freedom from strong feelings, to elimination, to peace, to direct knowledge, experience, to enlightenment, to Nibbana. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Keely. You guys have probably seen me teach this before if you've been in any of the classes where I've taught meditation, because this is where the Buddha is explaining that this meditation leads to just one thing. It leads to enlightenment. That's the whole goal. That's the whole purpose of this meditation. What he's not saying is he's not saying this is the only thing you need to get to enlightenment. It's kind of like saying your car, it leads to one thing, which is transportation. But of course, you need more than just transportation in your life. You need food, clothing, shelter, medical care. You need those kinds of things too. So, what he's saying here is if you do this meditation, it has one purpose and one goal. That is to cultivate the mind and to get to the point where the mind is free from these strong feelings, where you're experiencing this peace and the mind is actually enlightened. So, any questions here on this one? I think you guys have seen this many a times if you've been studying with me for a little bit. Okay, don't see any questions. So let's go to chapter 8. And I think it was Yihang that had her hand up as the second person. If you'd like to go, Yihang, you're more than welcome.
Thank you, Teacher David. Concentration by mindfulness of breathing leads to the abandoning of the fetters. Monks, concentration by mindfulness of breathing mindfulness meditation, when developed and cultivated, leads to the abandoning of the fetters. And how, monks, is concentration by mindfulness of breathing developed and cultivated so that it leads to the abandoning of the fetters? Here, monks, a monk having gone to the forest, to the foot of a tree, or to an empty hut, sits down, having folded his legs crosswise, straightened his body, and set up mindfulness in front of him. Just mindful he breathes in, mindful he breathes out. Breathing in long, he knows, I breathe in long. Or breathing out long, he knows, I breathe out long. Breathing in short, he knows, I breathe in short. Or breathing out short, he knows, I breathe out short. He trains thus, experiencing the whole body. Repeat as at chapter 1. He trains thus, reflecting on letting go, I will breathe in. He trains thus, reflecting on letting go, I will breathe out. It is in this way, monks, that concentration by mindfulness of breathing, when developed and cultivated so that it leads to abandoning of the fetters. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yihang. So again, as we were just talking, the breathing mindfulness meditation is cultivating mindfulness or awareness of mind. It's cultivating concentration, and it's helping you to have that ability to cut off and let go internally within the mind. So that now in day-to-day life, whenever there's any unwholesome qualities that are arising, you can cut it off and let it go. In meditation, you're cutting off anything and everything that comes up. But in day-to-day life, you're only cutting off the unwholesome things. And when you learn about the 10 fetters and you understand what they are and the symptoms of them, and you're implementing the proactive methods of eliminating them, whenever you actually see these aspects of those pollutions of mind arising, you would like to cut it off and let it go. That's how breathing mindfulness meditation leads to the elimination of the fetters, that whenever you see that arising, you cut it off and let it go. But you need to know what the fetters are, you need to know what the symptoms of them are, and you need to have been practicing breathing mindfulness meditation to build that ability to cut off and let go. And now you'll be able to cut this off. And the way that I think about this is I think about it like a wild bush. If you have this wild bush that's growing and growing and growing, well, if you've been training in breathing mindfulness meditation, when you see the symptoms of these fetters, you cut it back, right? And you've cut that wild bush back a little bit. But now it's going to grow a little bit more. And then you cut it back some more. And then it grows a little bit more. And you cut it back some more and it grows a little bit more. And you cut it back some more and it grows a little bit. Eventually, you're going to get down there in the roots and you're going to uproot this wild bush. And you've cut it back so far that you've now gotten down to the roots and you can uproot it out of your mind. And now that fetter is completely gone and it won't arise any longer in your mind. So while we say cut it off and let it go, it's really cut it off and 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 cut it off. And eventually your mind will let it go over multiple months and years for some of these fetters. Some simple cravings that you have in your mind, you can let those go in a matter of seconds. But some deeper ones, like maybe like you're attached to your mom, or maybe another relationship, or maybe a certain possession of yours, like a house or something like that, or a car, you might have some really deep attachments here. You might have some really deeply held things, like something like sexual activity usually takes a lot for the mind to be willing and interested and able to eliminate that. That can take multiple years. Someone has to go through a certain life cycle and experience that enough. Or maybe something like a certain relationship, or maybe conceit, like arrogance and pride. Maybe you have to really work at that for multiple years before your mind actually lets it go. So that's why there's this consistent, frequent training of 2 or 3 times a day for 30 minutes or more to get to the point where you've developed internally the mindfulness and awareness of mind, to then have the concentration to now focus the mind, not only in meditation, but in your day-to-day life, to be able to have that mindfulness and that concentration to now see these unwholesome qualities arising, and then to be able to cut it off and let it go. And if you're consistently training like this with meditation, you'll be able to cut it off and let it go in day-to-day life. But understand that this takes gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. So let me know what questions you guys have here, where the Buddha is connecting breathing mindfulness meditation to showing you how it's going to help to eliminate the fetters in the mind. You wouldn't be able to eliminate those unwholesome qualities without breathing mindfulness meditation. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So let me just say something here to wrap this up. Of course, we have some more chapters here, but just to wrap this chapter up, this is chapter 8. Is one of the ways to think about meditation is that in your meditation, you're developing certain wholesome qualities of mind that you're then going to be able to use in your day-to-day life. It's like taking your mind to the gym and exercising the mind. And now when you build those qualities, you can use those qualities in your day-to-day life. Just like if you went to the gym and your muscles became very strong, when your friend asks you like, hey, can you move this couch? You'd be like, sure, I can help you move that couch, no problem, right? Because you know that you've been working out and the body's fit. So it's the same thing, that if you've been exercising your mind in meditation to have mindfulness and concentration and cut off and let go, now in day-to-day life, you can use those qualities to cut off and let go. So this is the full-time job, Samantha, you're working on throughout not only your meditation, but in your day-to-day life, applying these qualities that you developed in your meditation to now transform the mind during your day-to-day life. Okay, so let's go to chapter 9. Would somebody like to read this one? This is essentially the same thing. I think I can actually go through this one pretty easily for you guys. Marcy, I think you volunteered to read next. What this one is this is essentially what we just read, but now the Buddha is talking about eliminating the underlying tendencies. These are like uprooting the craving, anger, and ignorance. Those are the underlying tendencies that he's talking about. But also, as you're making your way to the 3rd stage of enlightenment, you'll tend to have these little tics. You might have these things where you like pull your ear every once in a while. Or like for me, I used to always adjust my nose because my nose has been broken a couple of times. And there's like this little satisfying like the cartilage in my nose will kind of like crack, right? And you have these little underlying tendencies. When he talks about underlying tendencies, he's typically referring to craving, anger, and ignorance. You'll see him talk about this. But there's also these little underlying kind of little craving and clinging that your mind does, these little tiny things, these repetitive movements that you might notice because your mind's just kind of overactive and busy. And this is going to help you. The breathing mindfulness meditation is going to help you to develop concentration and mindfulness to be aware of these things and then cut them off and let them go. And it's essentially the same exact chapter that we just read, but he's just prefacing it a different way, and he's just ending it a different way, saying, hey, this is not only helping you to eliminate the fetters, it's helping you to eliminate these underlying tendencies as well. Okay, so now let's see what chapter 10 is. All right, and this here is essentially what we were just reading, but instead what he's saying is, he's saying that by practicing breathing mindfulness meditation, this is going to help you to understand the entire full path to enlightenment. It's not that you're in meditation and somehow miraculously you're going to cultivate wisdom that helps you to understand the path to enlightenment. But if you can understand breathing mindfulness meditation and why we're doing it this way, it helps you to understand all the other pieces of the path and why they're there. It's somewhat frequent that people question me about breathing mindfulness meditation because they've been taught all these different ways and all these different places that they go to. But this is because in these other places, they're not understanding the ultimate goal is to eliminate the conditioned feelings. And in order to do that, you need the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and you be able to cut off and let go. Anytime the mind is trying to form a conditioned feeling, you would like to cut that off and let it go and not allow the mind to do this. So this is why the breathing mindfulness meditation helps you to be able to understand the entire path, because you can understand every single factor on the Eightfold Path is helping you to eliminate craving, desire, attachment in some way. And that's what breathing mindfulness meditation is helping you to do. So you can kind of see this tying together of all the teachings, that it's all leading to the same thing, which is the underlying cravings, desires, attachment, the longing, the yearning. You're trying to transform the mind to no longer form its inner feelings based on these external things. So that's why when you're learning things like sometimes people teach you to do counting during meditation, or sometimes people teach you to look at your thoughts, observe your thoughts, invite your thoughts in, look at them, evaluate them. Sometimes people teach you to do body scanning where you're looking all over the body at all these different things. It's not getting you to the point where you're cutting off and letting go. That's what's going to eliminate the cravings in the mind. In all of those types of situations and others, the mind is just holding on and holding on and holding on. And that's why the mind isn't getting to enlightenment in these other communities where they're being taught this way, because the mind's still holding on. It hasn't trained to let go and cut off. So the Buddha is explaining to you here that by understanding breathing mindfulness meditation and what you're doing in breathing mindfulness meditation, it's going to help you to understand the full entire path to enlightenment, because it really helps you to pull together while you're doing any number of different things, because it's your breathing mindfulness meditation that's the real catalyst that's helping you to put right speech into action, for example, or put right action into practice, or to put right livelihood into practice, or to put any other aspect of this path into practice. You're going to need breathing mindfulness meditation. You can't practice the 7 factors of enlightenment without having mindfulness and awareness of mind. You can't practice the 5 precepts without having awareness of the mind. Any aspect of the path to enlightenment, you can't really get a real deep practice of it without first having developed your mindfulness. So even though this is the 8th step of the Eightfold Path, you really need to be developing this along with all the other factors, because this is what's going to help you to see the tying together of all the individual factors of the path. So let me know if you guys have any questions here. It's the same exact structure of the previous discourses, just highlighting another component of what this breathing mindfulness meditation is bringing to you and why it's so important to practice it. You can put your questions into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So what I'm going to do is just end class by thanking all of you for coming to class today. Thank you for understanding that I was absent last weekend. As you guys probably know, I had a motorbike accident and that was really unfortunate, but I really appreciate all the support and the care and the concern and the love and the generosity that you guys shared with me over this week. It really is touching to see how much you guys have helped me during this time of need and helped my family as well. There's been many students that have been reaching out and helping us in so many different ways. And I just would like to pause here at the end of class and let you know that if you've helped me in any way at any time during your tenure as a student with me, I really appreciate your generosity and your care and your concern, and particularly during this time right now, because being away and being in the hospital, it takes me out of my normal schedule. And, we had this problem where I never had the income to be able to afford a car. And now I have a car and I have safe transportation, thanks to the good-hearted nature of all of you guys that have supported me and helped me to be able to accomplish this. So I really would like to thank all of you guys for your generosity and your care and your concern during this period of time. And now you're going to see that I'm going to start teaching again. There was just a short little bit of impermanence while I was away getting this body and mind to be where it needed to be because I was unconscious for a period of time. And that was a nice experience to actually see how the mind being trained functions in that situation. But now, I'm going to be teaching each individual week just like I always have been, with continued generosity and continued appreciation and gratitude for all of you to be learning and practicing these teachings. So thank you so much for your dedication to learning and practicing. Thank you for volunteering to read during the class. Thank you for all your questions. Thank you for the work that you're doing outside of class to implement these teachings into your day-to-day life. This is the very best thing you could ever do for yourself, for those close to you, and all of humanity. As your mind's becoming more and more pure, you're going to start experiencing more and more peace and more joy coming through in the mind. Next week on Saturday, we're going to be in the next 10 chapters, which is chapter 11 through chapters 20. So if you'd like to read ahead of time, you're more than welcome to do that. In tomorrow's class in the group learning program, I'm going to be in chapter 13 of this book, which is titled Identifying Your Cravings, Cultivating Non-Craving, and Analysis of the Mind. This is where I teach you how to go in and identify your individual cravings and how to almost surgically remove them from the mind. Because everything else up in the group learning program up to this point has been important teachings that you need, but it's more generalized training. But now I'm going to show students how to go in and almost surgically remove individual cravings, desires, attachments from the mind. So this is a key important time to be able to learn that particular technique and that particular chapter, to be able to understand how to practice it, because you can really make some significant progress by doing this. So if you guys would like to join that tomorrow at 9 a.m. or 9 p.m., I'm going to be teaching that. And of course, the recording is always available on YouTube, Facebook, or on our podcast. So thank you all for joining, and perhaps I'll see you guys in one of these future classes. Have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. Take care. Sawadee ka.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.